The Orbs by Marie Joseph Charles, from Anthology of Love and Death, Volume 3. Copyright 2026. I looked out the window at the rolling, grassy hills. Low, sweeping winds rolled the honey-brown vegetation like fresh linens on a clothesline. There were hardly any trees left around my home, which left the view wide and vast. It was a sunny day with sparse shadows darkening arbitrary places on the hills. Most of the shadows were not from clouds, however. They were from the orbs that dotted the sky. A permanent fixture in my generation, the orbs were a new terror in my grandmother's time. They were covert at first. They were high in the sky and difficult to see without binoculars or scopes. Reports of orbs 1/3 of a meter in diameter were dismissed as hoaxes or AI creations. It was 2027 and the beginning of the AI uprising. Computers intentionally fed misinformation to the populace to dumb down the species and increase our reliance on technology. By the time we realized it, it was years later, and the orbs rendered the threat obsolete. The governments of the world were finally forced to take notice when it became apparent that there were thousands of orbs floating in the sky at indiscriminate points. They were hovering roughly a mile up from ground level at seemingly random locations across the planet. The governments tried sending drones to investigate, but they fell from the sky like dead birds. Planes could not pass within a kilometer of an orb without meeting the same fate. The missiles fared no better. Laser lights of all intensities were readily absorbed by the metallic, smooth surfaces. The only thing that could touch them were sound waves. Radar sent back images of perfectly smooth basketballs. Amateur alienologists and ufologists describe the surfaces as perfect beads of mercury suspended at fixed points in the air. Much to the conspiracy theorists' disappointment, none of these points seemed related to the pyramids or megaliths like Stonehenge. The orbs themselves seemed inert. There were no light or sound or even radiation energies emanating from them. They had roughly the same signatures as a perfectly spherical rock. While doomsday cults preached the end is here and monotheists flocked to houses of worship to pray, scientists tried to use the spectrographs and mass spectrometry to try to determine the chemical makeup. Others fired various sound waves in an attempt to elicit a reaction from the orbs. Results came back inconclusive. Finally, China decided the orbs were interfering with radio signals and used what amounted to a small cannon to fire a bullet-shaped chunk of metal at one hovering over the Sudanese desert. They successfully hit the sphere. It was the first time something other than sound waves had ever touched one. The orb itself had no response. The bullet was completely unscathed. If the orb was a liquid, it would have passed through. If it were a solid, the bullet should have been damaged. Instead, it bounced off the orb unharmed like a pebble thrown at a brick wall. Encouraged by this, various countries attempted to shoot them from the sky with bigger guns and bigger projectiles with much the same results. The Indian government tried a net gun to pull them from the sky in an attempt to collect one for study. The net returned with a perfect hole burned in the center, which further baffled researchers as none of the orbs had any kind of heat signature. The experiments continued for years with little information gained. The initial panic of the orbs' presence eventually subsided. While yes, new cults formed around their existence and entirely new government agencies focused on studying them, society at large mostly calmed until the next orbs arrived nearly 20 years after the initial contact. These orbs were nearly a kilometer in diameter each. They appeared evenly spaced every nearly 200 kilometers between the smaller orbs. They were the same metallic material, but the world watched in horror as great arms branched out and connected the two varying-sized orbs in intricate webs. And that was when the world went dark. Everything electric, from watches to car batteries, televisions, and phones all across the planet, all at once, stopped working. Windmills kept turning and nuclear plants kept firing, but it was as if electricity as a thing no longer existed. No lightning in the sky. no static jolt from a doorknob. Nothing. The resultant looting was global. Hundreds of people died every day in fights over resources that, at the time, were plentiful. Then things got bad. The orbs interfered with the moon. It was postulated that the moon's gravity was somehow impacted by the web between the orbs. It defied all logic and challenged our understanding of how gravity worked. Tides and migrations of animals were impacted. Alteration of ocean currents caused global devastation to the climate. Once bountiful cultivated crops shriveled and died. Formerly moist, fertile land dried. Millions of people and hundreds of millions of animals died every year from lack of food and potable water. It took us a while to notice the mammals disappearing as we focused on the plight of our own species. All the largest vanished one by one. Whales and sharks from the sea, elephants from Africa and Asia, moose and bear from North America, all gone. Then the birds. Billions and billions of birds ceased to exist. Then the crocodiles and the anacondas. Food became even more scarce as not only the human prey animals vanished, but ecosystems were catastrophically destroyed, making many wild crops difficult to grow. No birds in the rainforest meant fewer seeds being spread in their droppings. Pollinators died by the trillions from the change in weather patterns produced by the orbs. People and livestock died en masse. But to add to the terror, when all the larger animals were gone, the humans began to vanish overnight. Those of us strong enough to survive were picked off in small groups. It became common to wake in the morning and have entire families of neighboring houses vanish into thin air. These became the norm for my generation, a generation of unknown numbers. It's difficult to communicate without electronics and guiding animals like pigeons. When the orbs arrived, there were nearly 9 billion people worldwide. Estimates report a probable fewer than 600 million remained. It was assumed that Earth had become a food source for whatever controlled the orbs. Like fish in a pond, we were hooked and used to provide essential nutrients. But I knew that was not the case. I knew the real reason the orbs were wiping our planet of life, and it had everything to do with electricity. The orbs prevented electricity. It was unknown if they absorbed it or prevented its creation by affecting the transmission of negative and positively charged ions. But all living things produce electricity. The life forms on this planet were like little batteries, and if the spheres prevented electricity from being formed, all life should have died. But we persisted. We survived. This is why they took the large animals first. They were going to produce larger fields, and larger things are easier to study. Earth was not a cattle pen. It was a petri dish. We were something meant to be studied, and the disappearances were harvesting of samples. And then my turn came. I lived alone. I had never known a world without the orbs. They had been in place for nearly 8 decades by my time. My mother had been taken when I was 12. She had been the glue that held our family together. She insisted on trading for books whenever she could, a habit that I continued diligently, and ensuring that my family was not only literate, but as educated as we could be. She insisted our continued survival depended on it. One night, she had fallen asleep next to my father, and when he woke, she was gone. He grieved heavily. I tried to comfort him, but he only worsened and eventually took his own life. I did my best to look after my little brother, but he eventually caught a cough that I could not heal, and I watched him wither away before me. I was alone at 14 years old, and remained that way for the next 7 years, defending my home from would-be raiders and rapists. I made myself cozy that night on my straw mattress and my mother's favorite quilt. It gave me comfort to lie with it and my brother's favorite bear. I'd worked hard to till a new patch of land and my bones ached. But when I woke, I was no longer in my house. I lay on a cold metal floor in a perfectly round room. The light was bright and artificial, something I had never seen before and could not figure out where it emanated from. Location of origin indicates this is your most likely language. A loud voice seemed to surround me. What are you called? Terror struck my heart and choked my voice. Gracelynn. My name is Gracelynn. Do you intend to be violent, Gracelynn? No, I said shakily. No, I don't intend to be. A biped that looked almost like a human stepped through the wall as if it were made of thin air. The eyes were slightly larger than most people's, and there were no ears on the sides of the head. Where there should have been a nose, there was more of a disassociated lump of tissue, but it was flesh-colored and wore clothes resembling black coveralls similar to what we have on Earth. Studies indicate this appearance would be least frightening to you. I nodded. I'm scared, I admitted. But you don't seem like you want to hurt me. Harm is not our intent, Gracelynn. Why have you taken me? Please come with me while I explain. It held out an arm and gestured towards the wall it had just stepped through. We walked toward the wall, and it opened like a stone cutting through a waterfall. We stepped through into an open space full of enclosures. Animals of all kinds I had only seen in books surrounded us. Each were contained in their own mini environment with plants and water and artificial sunlight. There were tanks with fish and reptiles, birds, and even a tiger groomed itself behind invisible walls. These had all been extinct long before I was born, yet here they were, and all seemed to be at peace. Wow, I said. How did you create all of this? Our cloning abilities are quite well developed. We are able to duplicate living plant tissue in a matter of hours rather than days. Are you keeping all of the animals up here? Some, it said. Different vessels hold different animals. We are inside an orb. It was a statement rather than a question. Yes. What are you called? I asked. My name has syllables that your vocal structures cannot produce. You may call me Bob, as I understand that to be a common Earth name from your region. I giggled in spite of myself, feeling an unexpected break in the fear. Okay, Bob. Why are you on Earth? My species no longer has an organic form. Then what are you? I asked. He tapped what would be an index finger against the metal wall, and it made a distinct tinging noise. Inorganic, he said. My species created technology that extracted power from the environment. It was meant to be a clean, sustainable source of productive energy. But as we built more vessels, more power was removed from our environment, and our planet began to die. By the time we understood what was happening, the damage was irreparable. Our planet desiccated and decayed much as yours has. We copied ourselves into databanks in order to save our species while our organic bodies wasted away. We created these forms to put our consciousness into with the hope of one day creating organic bodies again. What are you made of? I asked. It is a composite of ferromagnetic mineral and what your species calls mercury. It is the constructive material of all of our vessels and structures. He held up a hand, and it morphed into something like the claw of a crawfish, and then back again. We control the shape and function with electromagnetic fields manipulated through the composite. Is that what holds the orbs in shape? I found myself being pulled in by this creature, and my remaining fear had been pushed aside. Yes, they are our vessels. We have been traveling and desperately seeking life forms that may be able to provide us with the answer to creating organic life for ourselves. Reproduction is impossible in an inorganic form, but just as with an organic form, our brain patterns age and eventually fail. Though our life expectancy in this manner has increased several-fold, we are dying off. In more than 1,000 of your years, your life forms are the only ones similar to ours that we have found. You found other life forms out there? I asked in awe. Many, he said, but none like yours. Why don't your ships kill us? I asked. You are intelligent, Bob praised. Admittedly, in retrospect, our own technology should have killed us instantly. We never knew why the electric field produced by our species was not absorbed by our technology. The fact that it does not impact the life on your planet either is one of the reasons we have been drawn here. This is a secret we must identify by studying the life forms on your planet. We strolled past an enclosure with a huge, fuzzy red ape. I reached out, daring myself to touch it. So you intend to kill our planet to save your species? Not at all. While yes, there has been damage to the population numbers, your species was far beyond the carrying capacity for your planet. This will create a new balance. And what about all the other species? I asked. Many of our vessels hold animals from your planet that would have otherwise perished. We provide for them with the intention of returning them once balance has been restored to your various ecosystems. Balance can be restored once we leave, and we cannot leave until we have the information necessary. What do you need from me? I asked. Live tissue study, Bob answered. Unfortunately, most participants of your species are either too hostile or too diseased to provide valuable information. Many refused to eat and made themselves ill. Many attempted to do us harm. We do have willing participants who are helping us now, but the more data we collect, the more valuable it will be. I looked around at all the animals resting comfortably in their vivariums, my eyes settling on a cow lounging in artificial sun and chewing its cud. You want me to be like them? In a manner. Enough samples have already been derived from these species. They are awaiting return. What happens when you are done with me? You will remain in captivity if you wish, or be returned to your planet when it is stable enough to sustain you. Or, if you prefer, you can be released back into your environment when we have learned enough from you, and you may continue as you have for as long as you can. What will happen when you leave? There is a planet here in this solar system, the largest one. It has a great deal of atmospheric electrical activity and no life to be harmed. Most of us will return to our planet while vessels holding reservoirs of animals will wait there and charge while allowing your planet to heal. There will be great catastrophic storms of wind, rain, and ice as the atmosphere balances. When it is deemed safe, keystone species will be released first, with waves of predetermined species to follow. Your species will be the last to be released. Why? We developed our technology because, like your species, we became entirely reliant on power, but our methods of production were creating an inhospitable environment. This was our attempt at saving ourselves and, ironically, we sped up our own destruction. We see ourselves in your humanity. We see the devastation you have caused, and there was debate about whether you should be returned at all. Your species is greedy, volatile, and cancerous. We intend to give the rest of the animals a chance to establish healthy populations before your release. I looked around again. Will we all live so long? He placed the tips of his 3, instead of 4, fingers together. Most assuredly. I nodded and took a deep breath. Okay. How do we start? First, we must attend to your nutritional requirements. The noises from your abdomen indicate that you have immediate needs. I looked down at my stomach just as it let out a loud, hostile groan. Bob held out his arm and escorted me back to the wall we had initially walked through. It parted again, and in my once barren space there now rested a table laden with meat, vegetables, and bread. A pitcher of cold water sweated in the center, inviting me to drink. I began to salivate heavily. This was more food than I would normally have in a week, and meat was a true rarity. Is it real? Or your tricks with mercury? It is very real. Poisoning you will not serve our purpose. We need you to be strong and healthy for data collection. I poured myself a cup of the water and drank deeply. It was cold, sweet, and clean. It didn't have the dirt-like aftertaste of the water that I distilled from my pond near my house. This was pure water, and I had never tasted anything like it. One by one, I sampled the broccoli, corn, banana, and unknown meat. I had never tasted such wonderful things. My diet was mostly beets, sweet potatoes, and beans. These were things I was able to grow in the sometimes harsh conditions around my home. Sometimes I could trade them for bread and very rare meat like dried catfish. I'd even tasted kale once, but nothing compared to the amazing flavors in front of me. I stuffed myself until I felt like I might burst, all while Bob stood nearby and studied my movement. When I felt like I could take no more, I rested my hand on my swollen belly and looked at him. He looked back with his head tilted to one side. "You don't eat anymore, do you, since you're inorganic?" His shoulders slumped in the universal sign of sorrow. "No, we do not. Food was a significant part of our culture. Sharing stories, greeting friends, business arrangements were all done around food. It feels as if that part of what once defined us has been lost." Feeling his melancholy, I reached out to put my hand on his shoulder but drew back. "Hopefully you'll be able to rebuild." He bowed his head. "I have other matters to attend to. Please be comfortable while you digest." The table dissolved into the floor, leaving only the remains of my meal. A long projection arose around a foot tall and 4 feet wide. It moved like a ripple in a pond and pushed the food through the wall next to where Bob stood. From the floor where the table had been, a bed arose. It was the same metallic gray as everything else, but when I pushed down on it, it moved like a pillow of water. I cautiously pulled myself onto it and laid down. It was warm instead of the cold I expected the metal to be. I sank down into it, allowing the heat to envelop me. I had never been so comfortable in my life. Bob exited through the wall. I wanted to tell myself I was dreaming. If I willed it, maybe it would be true. I knew the Orbs were ships. I knew the inhabitants were studying us. Maybe that's why I wasn't as surprised as I felt I should have been. But the fact that I should have been more fearful than I was caused me the most distress. I didn't know what these creatures were or if their claim to return me to home was true. What happened to their own planet could have been completely made up. At this point, I was an animal in one of those zoos I had read about. I rubbed my overfull belly again. There could have been anything in that food. I'm not sure how long I lay there vacillating between comfort and the warmth of the bed and the full belly and the anxiety of the unknown, but I heard Bob's voice ring through the air again. "May I enter?" he asked. I sat up and put my feet on the floor. "Yes." He flowed through the wall carrying a large box that he set on the floor. "Biosensors indicate that you are experiencing mild distress, which is to be expected. We have found that providing things from one's own environment help alleviate that stress." The box opened on its own and he lifted out my mother's quilt and my brother's bear. "Do these provide comfort?" I took them from him and buried my face in the quilt. It smelled like my straw mattress, like home. I felt my eyes burn a little. "Yes," I answered in a whisper. "Good. Observations of your behavior prior to your retrieval indicate that you enjoy books. I have brought several about animals and food, as you may have enjoyed both of these things since your arrival. I have also obtained several fiction books centered around human courtship, as your age group tends to be prone to loneliness." "Observations? You were watching me?" "Yes. We only select specimens that are most likely to provide us with the information we need." "Why did you select me?" The box morphed into a table and he set the books on it. "Your resilience." "Resilience?" "You defend your territory, provide for your needs, and educate yourself, all without the aid of a companion or herd. You are one of the few capable of doing so." I let that absorb for a moment. "Why did you take my mother?" Bob was silent for a moment before pulling a small object from somewhere in his clothes. He pointed it at me and then touched it in a few places while staring at it. "Aisling 3414. He seemed to be reading off the object. A jolt ran through my body at hearing my mother's name. Bob continued. "She was on a different vessel, but I had met her once. She was selected for her intelligence and nurturing behavior." He slumped a little. "She was kind." I nodded, feeling tears welling in my eyes. I could read his posture. "What happened to her?" "She was not healthy when she came to us. She had tissue in her abdomen that was growing uncontrolled. We tried to help her, to cut it out and relieve her pain, but it was not enough. She died a few years after her arrival. I had vague memories of my mom saying that her stomach hurt while clutching at it, and she had to rest more frequently in the end. She had assured us that it was only her age and promised she would be all right. She was sick and we never knew. Bob continued. She was instrumental in our understanding of a great deal about your species. She never questioned us or our objective. She said she wanted to help make a better world for her children. Why didn't you take my dad? We expected him to care for his offspring. He did not possess the intelligence of your mother, and your brother was too sickly to warrant collecting your entire family. I thought about Louis, buried in the hill in the hackberry tree next to our father. I looked down at his little bear in my hand. I was the last of my family. I had already known it, but hearing my mother's fate made it even more real. Thank you, I whispered. Bob nodded his head and drifted through the wall. For the next, what I'm assuming were several days, I was kept well fed with more and more delicious new food. I ate more meat in that time than I had in my entire life. I felt strong and had more energy, but this newfound stamina added to my restlessness. I was used to spending my days tending to my plants and foraging or collecting wood to burn. Sitting in a quiet room with books was nice and peaceful respite at first, but I grew bored quickly. They provided me with a moving surface to run and walk on and music that I had never heard to keep me active. Bob came to visit me regularly. He would point his device at me and ask me to do things like breathe deep, do jumping jacks, or stand on my head. I tried to ask him questions about his homeworld and his family, but all I could deduce from his evasive answers were that he had many siblings, and his planet was very cold all year round. I had even asked why our scientists could not collect data about the orbs. Multiphase vibratory insulation, he stated as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. One morning, after a breakfast of salted eggs, by far my favorite thing that I had been provided, orange juice and bread, Bob's voice rang through the air. May I enter? He asked. I had been accustomed to his visits after my second meal, but the early company was a welcome surprise. Yes. He moved through the wall and bowed his head to me slightly. Gracelynn, it seems you are ready for sample harvesting. The eggs turned to stone in my stomach. Will it hurt? There may be some residual discomfort, but the process is quite painless, he assured me. I had my doubts, but I followed him through the wall. We passed the tiger and the blue-faced bird that was taller than me. We passed through another wall and entered a room with rows and rows of shelves twice my height, displaying bottles and jars of unknown substances. We passed through yet another wall into a metallic room with a metal table and smaller shelves holding glass bottles and metal instruments. Bob? My voice didn't sound like my own, and it startled me. I'm scared. You do not need to be afraid. We are very efficient. He led me to the metal table and helped me lie down. It wasn't warm like my bed. It was cold, sterile feeling. Bob? My voice was shaking now. I am here, Gracelynn, but you must sleep. And just like that, everything was black. I entered a dreamless sleep unlike anything I had ever felt before. When I woke, I was in my warm, water pillow bed tucked under my mother's quilt with Louis's bear beside my head. I sat upright. My lower back was stiff, and there was some discomfort between my legs, but as Bob promised, there wasn't pain. May I enter? I nodded and rubbed my neck. Yes. Bob came through the wall, and it parted as if he was followed by a table of meat, vegetables, and rice. You require calories. I moved to the table and scooped a fork full of rice into my mouth. I hadn't realized I was starving until I smelled all of the things on the table. How long was I asleep? I asked. 3 of your days, he answered as he held the device pointed at me. 3 days? No wonder I'm hungry. My apologies for any discomfort, he said. We provide intravenous nutrition, but your intestinal tract begins to malfunction when it is not regularly used. I looked at my arms and then at the back of my hand and saw nothing. All procedures requiring venipuncture utilize the femoral vessels as well as those of the neck, he clarified. I put my hand to my throat and felt a small welt that was tender. Did you get what you need? For the first sampling, yes. You have provided us with a great deal of information. I'm glad, I said through a giant mouthful of something orange and foreign but heavenly. How much longer will you need me? Unknown, he answered as he tucked his instrument back into his clothing. Can I leave this room? Or have a habitat that I'm used to like the other animals? You are unhappy, he asked, cocking his head. Not entirely, but I feel restless. He stepped over to the wall and placed a finger on it. I had never seen him do this before and watched intently. He stared at the finger for a moment before nodding and turning to me. You have been granted permission to wander the biosphere area for several hours every day. You can communicate through walls? I forked more rice into my mouth. We are made of the same material as our vessels, so we can send signals through it. This is how we pass through walls, control shapes for things for you, etc. We control electrical movements through the composite. Mercury is very conductive, which makes it quite easy. It will be hard to adapt to a life without this ability when we have completed our new organic forms. Is that how you knew I was distressed the first day I was here? He nodded. You are organic and therefore have no control over the composite material. However, because your environment is made of it, we can monitor your heart and your breathing patterns as vibrations move through the metal. We also monitor much of your organ function via the collection and consistent analysis of your sweat through the capillaries in the composite. I looked at my warm, comfortable bed. All this time they had been using it to monitor me, and for some reason I felt a twinge of betrayal. When can I start to visit the animals? I asked. You must rest more today. You may begin your excursions tomorrow. For the rest of the day I ate and read. I collected some of the animal books he had provided and selected which ones I would take with me to learn more about the animals I shared the ship with. The first few days of wandering were far from productive. There were simply too many animals in too vast a space for me to even focus on just one. Every time I stopped to observe, motion in another enclosure would catch my eye and I would run to see what had moved. When I was hungry, a table with bread or rice, vegetables, and water would zoom down the alleyway as if having read my mind, and then when I had my fill, it would zoom right back out of sight. I was always fascinated to watch as it appeared to be both made out of the floor but move independently. Every day Bob would come to run me through some tests and aim his device at me, just as he had before. He insisted I walk without shoes so that my health could continue to be monitored. I found it annoying, but it was a small price to pay for freedom from my room. While he examined me and scrutinized his device, I would regale him with the information I had learned about the animals. I'm sure he knew all of it in some capacity, but it was new and exciting to me, and I needed to share it with someone. Nearly every day was like this. Some days I would select an animal and find it in my books, learning all I could, allowing it to consume my entire free time. Other days I would make a game of finding animals that were similar and then reading about what made them different. Did you know that black bears have 42 teeth, but sloth bears only have 40? I was ravenous in my studies about the animals and how they lived, and Bob seemed agreeable to providing me with more books when I asked. When in my room, I would have breakfast and supper. I was even provided with hot bathing pool. It was a bliss I had never known. I had always bathed in the cold pond near my house. A hot bath was incredible. Sometimes I would be taken back to the sampling room where I would be put to sleep, only to wake in my room hungry and in need of rest before I can explore more. Each time they kept me unconscious for longer and longer amounts of time. I suspected they were testing how long they could keep me that way, but I didn't dare ask why. I didn't know how long I was held in my captivity, but when I was selected, as Bob put it, my hair touched my shoulders. It eventually touched my backside. It was the only indication that such a great deal of time had elapsed. I was feeling stronger than I had ever felt in my life. I was hardy and alert. I may have been a science experiment, but I was treated well. I tried to ask why I never saw any other humans or more people like Bob, but he simply told me it was not necessary. One day I wandered past a thing called a wombat down a dark hallway. I was instantly met with the feeling that I was not supposed to be there, but I could not ignore the urge to continue. The hall opened into a bright room with rows and rows of tubes taller than me. Inside each tube was an unconscious creature. They were some type of chimeral amalgam of beasts. They all had fur, some white like the polar bear, some striped like the zebra, or spotted like a wildcat's. The hands were very human-like, though they had short fur, the same color as the body, and talons like eagles at the end. All had ears on the tops of their head that came to a point, much like a bat, but the faces were very distinctly human. My hand flew to my mouth, and I dropped the book I was carrying when I realized that one of the striped ones, while beautiful in the most alarming way, had my face. "Do you like her?" Bob joined next to me. What is all of this?" We failed to determine why bioelectricity is unaffected. It was decided that we would create our new bodies as planned, but return to our old technology when we return home. I pointed to the striped creature. "She has my face." "Yes. As I told you, our cloning abilities are quite well developed. We decided to take what was most useful from creatures of your world and create something entirely new for ours. Fur to keep us warm, an enhanced sense of sound and smell, the cardiovascular system of a crocodile, all of the things that we think will suit us best." "She has my face," I said again. He nodded. "She is for my wife. I have become very fond of you, Gracelynn. I know I must return you to your planet, but I will miss you greatly." Miss me? I had never heard Bob express anything like emotion before, nor had I ever heard him talk about a wife. "What aren't you telling me?" I asked. His shoulders drooped. "We have run out of time. If we stay, we will not be able to help your planet heal. We must move all of our vessels away from your planet and station biospheres at the designation areas around the larger planet. More importantly, we must reconnect with the rest of our people and bring them what we have collected here." "Bob, if you could draw energy from Jupiter in the first place, why did you stay on Earth? Why did you destroy everything?" His eyes met mine. "Your species was on a very destructive path. We needed to keep you from making our mistakes. We needed to stop you from causing your own destruction. We could not watch from a distance while you annihilate your entire planet." I swallowed back the sudden hatred that welled up inside me. "That was not your decision to make." "Perhaps not, but if we had not done so, you would never have been born. Your species' thirst for electricity for your financial profit, information processing, the AI we saved you from, was insatiable. You were less than a decade from reaching a point your planet could not return from, and less than 3 from mass extinction. Billions of people died. That is mass extinction. And you caused it." He nodded. "But we did it so the planet could heal. We saved species that would have otherwise died off. If we had let you self-destruct, it would take several millennia for repair to even begin. Please understand, we did it to save you." My mind was reeling and I felt sick. I slumped to the floor and hugged my knees to my chest. I wanted to cry. I couldn't breathe. So many people had died. "I wanted you to live, Gracelynn. I care for you." The floor lifted and pushed me to my feet. Bob took my hands. He had never actually touched me before, and I couldn't feel it. I was completely numb as I was led down a hall, through a wall, back to the sampling room. I instinctively lay on the metal table, trying desperately to process what Bob had just told me. "Do you wish to return to your life as it was, or do you wish to see what it will be when restored?" he asked softly. I turned and looked him in the eye for the first time. I took in his lack of ears and giant eyes. I noticed his skin was smooth like the table I laid on. I'd never really absorbed what he looked like before. I would never know what his species actually looked like. But I knew now what they had created, what I had helped them create. "I want to see." He nodded. "Then you must sleep." And then it was all black. When I woke, I was not in my warm water pillow bed. I was on dirt surrounded by walls I vaguely recognized. I pulled my mother's quilt down and looked around. This was my old bedroom. Dirt from unknown years was piled on the floor. There was no glass in the windows, and part of the roof was caved in. But this was the room I had left before I was taken to the Orb. I stood and looked out the window, with my hair trailing the ground behind me. The grass was green instead of the muted yellow I was used to. There were birds, actual birds, in the sky, and a deer by the tree where my father and brother were buried. The sun was brighter than I remembered, and the wind blew harder. I turned, and in the corner there were stacks of books, most of which I recognized from the Orb, but a few new ones and several bags of seeds. A gift from Bob. I breathed deep. This new world was going to be Herculean to navigate, but I was ready. Thank you for listening to The Orbs by Marie Joseph Charles from Anthology of Love and Death, Volume 3. For more short stories, audio stories, feel free to follow on Patreon, as well as YouTube, Spotify, and all base social media. Thank you.